This is PediaCast.
Welcome to PediaCast, a pediatric podcast for parents. And now, direct from the campus of Nationwide Children's, here is your host, Dr. Mike.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to PediaCast. It is a pediatric podcast for moms and dads. This is Dr. Mike coming to you from Nationwide Children's Hospital. We're in Columbus, Ohio. It's episode 512 for March 3rd, 2022. We're calling this one Bedtime Problems. I want to welcome all of you to the program. Our Pediatrics in Plain Language panel joins us again this week, and the topic at hand are those pesky bedtime problems that tend to creep up really at all ages. With babies, we have to think about safe infant sleep. Can be a big problem if we're not paying attention to that. Bottles at bedtime are not a good thing, and we're going to explain exactly why that is, and alternatives if your child needs something in their mouth at bedtime. And then crying at bedtime and overnight, boy, that can keep parents up. It doesn't really get better when you have toddlers. You know, we have to think about bedtime routines and kids getting out of bed or calling for help. There's those night terrors. And as they grow into school-age kids, we still have to think about their routines, fear of the dark, bedwetting. And then when they become teenagers, we do want to consider healthy sleep habits for that age group. And what do you do for difficulty falling asleep? Or insomnia, if you're up a lot during the night. We'll also consider snoring and obstructive sleep apnea. We'll talk about the benefits of sleep and the risks of not getting enough sleep. And there's also risks of getting too much sleep. That's also an issue. So we have a hodgepodge of bedtime and sleeping topics for you this week at all the ages, from infants through teenagers. And since our Pediatrics in Plain Language panel is here to explore these items with us, we will, as always, be intentional about using plain language throughout our discussion. Because during these episodes, we do take extra care to speak with words everybody can understand, even if you know absolutely nothing about medicine and healthcare. Now, of course, we try to do that every week on PediaCast, but with these episodes, we really focus in and pay attention. And if we do happen to use medical jargon or it slips through by accident, sometimes you have to use it because there's not a plain language term, a simple one. And so we use the medical jargon, but then explain in a paragraph what exactly that means. And during these episodes, we try to hold each other accountable and do our best to explain as we move along. We also try to cover pretty basic concepts of child health and wellness. Some of our past episodes with the Plain Language panel includes your child's stomach. That was actually a two-parter. Your child's breathing, their mouth and nose, another one on mouth and throat, and then ears and nose. We've talked about your child's eyes, fever and illness, newborn baby care, keeping kids safe, reading and family literacy, fitness facts and ideas. So lots of past plain language content for you. And you can find all of these episodes packaged together as a playlist on SoundCloud. Simply search for PediaCast in the SoundCloud app or on their website, and then look for the Pediatrics in Plain Language playlist. You can also check out the show notes for this episode, 512, over at PediaCast.org, and I'll include a link to the playlist so you can find it very easily. So our plain language panel, as you will recall, is made up of two wonderful primary care pediatricians at Nationwide Children's, Dr. Mary Ann Abrams and Dr. Alex Rakowsky. They will join us in a moment. But first, our usual quick reminders. Don't forget you can find PediaCast wherever podcasts are found. We're in the Apple and Google podcast apps, iHeartRadio, Spotify, SoundCloud, Amazon Music, and most other podcast apps for iOS and Android. If you like what you hear, please remember to subscribe to our show so you don't miss an episode. Also, please consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts so that others who come along looking for evidence-based child health and parenting information will know exactly what to expect. We're also on social media. We love connecting with you there. You'll find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Simply search for PediaCast. And there's that handy contact link at the website, PediaCast pediacast.org if you would like to suggest a future topic for the program. Also want to remind you the information presented in every episode of our program is for general educational purposes only. We do not diagnose medical conditions or formulate treatment plans for specific individuals. If you have a concern about your child's health, be sure to call your healthcare provider. Also, your use of this audio program is subject to the PediaCast Terms of Use Agreement, which you can find at PediaCast.org. So let's take a quick break. We'll get our panel connected to the studio, and then we will be back to talk about bedtime problems. It's coming up right after this. Our Pediatrics in Plain Language panel is in the house once again. You will recall that Dr. Marianne Abrams is an assistant professor of pediatrics at The Ohio State University College of Medicine and a pediatrician with primary care pediatrics at Nationwide Children's Hospital. Dr. Alex Rakowsky, also an assistant professor of pediatrics at Ohio State and a pediatrician with Olentangy Primary Care at Nationwide Children's. Let's give a warm welcome back to our friends. As always, it is really great having you guys here.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good.
Great to be here. Good to see both of you.
Yeah, great seeing both of you as well. Marianne, we always start with you because you have a particular passion surrounding plain language. And remind us what that is and why it's important.
Yeah, I thought I'd keep it kind of short and sweet today. Plain language is what we call the kinds of words that you would use sitting around your living room or your family room, talking with friends or family or neighbors, words your grandmother would understand, words that we take some care to make sure we don't use technical medical terms, or words that may have a similar meaning in everyday language compared to medicine. So that we call that jargon. So a simple word like diet, in everyday life, diet is something you take on. It's often considered restrictive or unpleasant, but we toss that word diet around all the time in medicine and say, hey, Mike, tell me about your diet. And all I really want to know is, what do you routinely eat every day? What kinds of fruits and vegetables? Do you eat a lot of junk food? Whatever. So in medicine and healthcare and other workplaces, whether you're a car mechanic or a lawyer or an engineer, we want people to use the kinds of words that the people that they're speaking to can understand. Yeah. And I think today we're going to be talking about sleep. A couple examples came into my mind. I think we actually may be talking about what we call sleep hygiene, which is I think a hilariously funny way to talk about how well people sleep, because most people hear the word hygiene and start thinking about bathing and all kinds of associated things. But sleep hygiene is like what your sleeping patterns are and how you go about making them hopefully as good as possible. And then I think we're also going to be talking about enuresis. And while most people probably won't hear that word, you may hear it from your doctor or look it up on Dr. Google. And enuresis is just a very fancy word for wetting the bed and bedwetting. So those are just a couple examples of non-plain language and their plain language matches.
Yeah. And when I think about bedwetting, and if I'm writing in a chart, it's really easy for me to say to type out enuresis. And then, if I'm in an exam room, it's just easy for that word to fly out without really thinking about, hey, this family probably has no idea what the word enuresis or nocturnal enuresis, if we want to get more specific of when the wetting occurs. So it may end up in the note that you type for them to take home that prints out, and because you're used to typing enuresis, and then they're like, I didn't know my child had enuresis. Oh my gosh. Yeah, exactly. So plain language is important. We do have a book I want to remind everyone about, not a book that we wrote, but there is a book called What to Do When Your Child Gets Sick, which is intentionally written in plain language. It's from the Institute for Healthcare Advancement, which is a nonprofit organization. And we do have a discount code that we'll put in the show notes, pod 719, and the book's only $7.77. And I did check to see if it had gone up, and it hasn't. It's still that price. Of course, you can get it for full price at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you get your books, you can find it. But it's a nice book, especially if you have a new baby at home, because it really goes through things that you need to know for child health and wellness, but using plain language. And then we also have a survey.
Like,
oh yeah, Marianne.
When you said that, it made me think too. It might be good for a youngster that's starting to do some babysitting, or maybe a grandma who's going to be watching their grandchild during the day, or somebody that may not know your family quite as well when they start to take care of your child.
Yeah,
it's maybe a nice handbook for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I also want to remind everybody that we have a Pediatrics in Plain Language survey that you can get to, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes, just to give us some feedback on these particular episodes and what you think, what we could do better, what you like, what works, that kind of thing. And then there's also a playlist on SoundCloud where we've packaged all of these plain language episodes together, because we've done a lot of them over the past several years. And I mentioned some examples in the intro to this show, so folks can find that playlist on SoundCloud, and there'll also be a link to it in the show notes over at PediaCast.org. All right, so let's jump right in to sleep. And Alex, I wanted to start with you. Remind us, what are the benefits of sleep, and then what are the risks of not getting enough sleep?
So sleep is fascinating. I think historically, people have been fascinated by the whole topic of something that you do basically a third of the day, and kids almost half the day, when Marianne starts talking about the hours that they're sleeping. So it's still not fully understood, which is sort of ironic that one of the most common activities of humans is not fully understood. But some of the benefits that we are aware of are all sort of physical benefits, where your body does get a chance to shut down, relax, and heal. So appropriate sleep for any athlete, for example, is vital. But anybody who does exercising, it's vital. It also has some mental benefits where it helps with your memory. And there have been a lot of studies that have looked at sleep deprivation in students in college, where if they're sleep deprived, they either have problems of long-term memory, or with time, even their short-term memory just doesn't kick in as well as it should. So it has a lot to do with how our functioning goes with memory. And it definitely has some behavioral and emotional benefits. And adults and children who sleep seem to be as stable or match the stability that they can reach for their individual self. So if you have somebody who's low anxiety by nature, who just doesn't get enough sleep, they actually can ratchet up to higher anxiety. Where somebody who is high anxiety by nature can actually keep it quelched a little bit better if they get enough sleep. So the risks tend to be physical, as far as like not healing as well, not remembering things as well. And then also just with personality, where people who tend not to sleep tend to be a little more anxious, a little more irritable, tend not to enjoy life as much as others just because they're constantly tired. So, and the last one I want to mention is just remembering fun things. And we have a large family, and for a while there, we were both pretty sleep deprived, my wife and I. And the kids remember things that we did, and I just remember being there because we have a magnet on the wall. And my wife's like, I guess we went to that cavern because there's a magnet, but honestly, we don't remember a whole lot otherwise because we were probably sleep deprived at the time we went. And I think everybody can remember moments like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Marianne.
Yeah, one thing you said, Alex, reminded me too of, you talked a little bit about teenagers and students and college kids, and sleep is important for remembering, which is true. But just wanted to expand on that a little bit, that a lot of kids that age pull all-nighters or stay up really late for a variety of reasons that we'll talk about in a little bit. But there's something, because we feel like we think we're cramming it all in for a test or an exam or a project, but not just the remembering, but the fancy word is that sort of consolidation of learning. It's like something goes on in your brain while you're asleep, so that all that information that you have been studying and hopefully, building that knowledge, it has a better chance of embedding itself and being truly learned, as opposed to just sort of crammed into your head and hope that some of it will stay there for that exam the next day. So that consolidation of learning is a really important function of sleep too.
I think that has a really vital role for just kids as students and kids for learning, where the consolidation is really what kind of like puts things into your brain the way it should be kind of placed down the road to have long-term memories. I didn't get into adult things just because, PediaCast, not AdultaCast. But there are like limits that we can have our residents work. I work with the residents as one of the associate program directors, truck drivers, pilots. I mean, people have noticed that people will make more mistakes if they're sleep deprived. And there's a lot of very nice studies in adults where sleep is vital and something that we tend to not understand why completely, but we know it's important. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it a third of the day or half a day, or if you're my dog, 90% of the day.
And I don't know about you, but sometimes you're dealing with a really tough problem or a concern, and it just feels like I've got to solve this or figure it out, and it's very stressful. And I've learned that often, sometimes you go to bed, you get a good night's sleep, and somehow the answer has revealed itself in the morning, and it seems clear. It's not quite as worrisome as it was, and I think that's some of that work behind the scenes, so to speak, about the beauty of sleep and the importance of sleep.
Yeah. So it's important, as you've mentioned, for physical health, emotional health, mental health, and cognitive health or learning. I had to explain that. This is plain language. But I mean, it's just all around really important that we get enough sleep. However, I also came across this. There is a risk of sleeping more than the recommended amount of time that's evidence-based in adults. So this has not been tested in kids, but adults who sleep more than the recommended amount of time on a regular basis have increased risk of hypertension or high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, and mental health problems. Although you could argue maybe mental health problems are what causes you to sleep more, but which is first the chicken or the egg? We don't always know. But there is evidence, those are evidence-based associations with sleeping more than the recommended amount. So as we talk about minimum amount, getting enough or getting too much, that means that we have to have some understanding of how much we are supposed to get. And so, Marianne, that is my question for you. At the various ages, how much sleep should kids be getting?
Well, as you said, the amount of sleep a child should get does depend on their age. And I think another testament to how important sleep is the amount of sleep that babies and young children, or toddlers and young preschool children need. If they're spending so much time sleeping, that must mean there's a lot going on in their bodies while they're sleeping, at least to the outside world. So babies in that first year of life can sleep anywhere from, say, 12 to 16 hours a day. And that does include naps. So they don't sleep a solid 12 or 16 hours. But if you add that all up, anywhere in that range can be normal. And then from that next year of life, from 1 to 2 years, that goes down just a little bit, maybe 11 to 14 hours a day, including naps. And then up till school age, so say it's from 3 to 5 years, 10 to 13 hours. And a lot of those children will still be taking naps. I think one of the things that we have to be careful of as parents is to say every child up to age 5 has to take a nap. Some kids need a morning nap and an afternoon nap. Some only need one nap in the afternoon. And some outgrow that need for a nap by the time they're 4. And forcing them to take a nap is also not ideal either. So by the time they get into school, like 6 to 12 years old, they can move into single digits. Maybe they need about 9 hours and up to about 12 hours. And then adolescents, teenagers, maybe 8 to 10 hours. So, and then as you move into an adult range, 8, give or take. So clearly that need for sleep changes over time, but it's also what you heard me say is there's a range. Yep. And some people need 8 hours when they're a teenager. Some are going to need 10 or 11.
Yeah. And that's a great point, because we have 7 children, and they're all mostly adults now, and they were all over the board. And I think it's important to tell parents that there will be a range, but the parents can figure out, okay, I have a toddler who's only sleeping. We had one who slept 8 hours a night and no naps, and she was completely fine. But we had to monitor the fact that you're sleeping about 4 hours less than the other kids did, and you're still functioning completely normal. So these are recommended numbers. And I think a lot of parents think, well, my child's not sleeping the 12 hours. What's wrong with my child? And some kids just don't. But as long as they're developing normally, happy kids who otherwise don't seem to need to sleep, that just may be them. But you just can't assume, well, Johnny's sleeping 6 hours. That's normal if he's cranky all the time. That may be why he's cranky all the time.
So you guys make really good points that it's important to look at outcomes. And so, if everything's going great and there are no physical, mental, academic, cognitive, thinking kind of problems, then the amount of sleep that you're getting is probably fine. But if you are having any of those issues, then that's one thing you definitely want to examine. Are you getting enough sleep? And are you within that range that's suggested for that particular age? And by the way, it may be difficult to remember all those numbers. I am going to put a link in the show notes to the recommended amount of sleep for pediatric populations, which is a consensus statement of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. So these are people who know what they're talking about. This is all evidence-based, and I'll put a link to that. And by the way, it charted out just as you said, Marianne, because I had written down the numbers from that consensus statement, and they are exactly what you shared. Let's change our focus here for a moment on age-specific sleep problems. And so I wanted to start with infants, and I wanted to sort of at the very beginning of talking about babies and sleep, remind us, Marianne, about the rules for safe infant sleep, because these are really, really important.
They are really, really important. We have to say that because we talk a lot about them. There's some evidence as research that shows that that we don't maybe talk about them as much as we should, or we don't talk about them in a way that people remember or in the right way. So while we've made progress, and I'll tell you why I'm saying that, over the last several years, we still have a ways to go. And of course, the main thing, the reason you asked that question is because there's a lot of discussion, a lot of good research to show there is a right way to put a baby down to sleep. And some of that requires changing patterns and habits that people have used for many years. And the most important rule of thumb is that a baby needs to be laid on their back alone with nobody else, not a sibling, not a parent, not a pet, not another baby, on a firm surface, not a soft, fluffy, cuddly surface, alone on their back in a bed or a crib or some other safe, contained surface that's designed for babies. And the other thing we need to really work on, I think, is not just making sure they're alone in terms of other living, breathing people, but also alone in terms of other stuff in the bed, cute, fluffy blankets and animals and stuffed animals and little cushions to theoretically help support them and bumper pads and all those things. We've learned over time that all of those can pose a risk factor for what it can be called sudden infant death, where a baby rolls over or somehow ends up not being able to breathe because their face either got face down or kind of snuggled up against one of those soft surfaces that we talked about. Or if they're sharing a bed with the parent, sometimes the parent can overlay or lay over the baby.
Yeah.
So that was a long thing, alone on their back on a firm surface.
Yeah. So ABC, if you can't remember that, alone on their back in a crib or other baby approved container. Okay. And then what about bottles? Are bottles at bedtime a good idea? And if not, why not?
Yeah, that's, I think, another long-standing habit. But I think the easiest thing to say is no bottles in bed. There's a lot of good reasons not to do that. First of all, there's no need for it. Second, bottles will often have either formula or breast milk that may have been pumped. And none of that is good for a baby's teeth as they develop over time. Also, it gets them used to having to have that, and kind of a habit develops where they think they need to have that in order to go to sleep. So it kind of sets them up for later say the bottle rolls out of their mouth and they don't have the developed arms and muscles yet to put it back in their mouth. So that can create a crying baby who really doesn't need to cry because they really aren't hungry. They're just used to having that. So for a lot of reasons, we do not recommend bottles at bedtime.
Yeah. And then it violates the first rule of safe baby sleep of being alone in the crib. And if you have a bottle in the crib, they're not alone.
There you go.
And so, people say, well, they have to be sucking on something, but that's only because they have developed that habit, that comforting habit. But it's really safest not to have something in the bed with them, not to have something in their mouth that creates a possible choking hazard too. And so really no bottles, no pacifiers, nothing in the bed except the baby. And if they don't like it, then they'll come around. They'll get used to it with time. And that really leads me into the next question. And this is probably foremost in a lot of parents' minds if you have a young baby at home. And that is, what do you do when they're crying? When they're crying, when you lay them down to go to bed, or they wake up in the middle of the night and they're crying. I mean, this really causes a lot of distress for a lot of parents. What can we do about that?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to think about that. I think early on in those first few months of life, a baby who's crying, you want to check on them, make sure they really are okay, that they aren't sick, they don't have a fever, something hasn't irritated them, like even, sometimes their little fingernails could scratch another part of their body or their eye or something like that. So you do want to check a young baby who's crying. And sometimes they wake up in the middle of the night, especially those newborn babies, because they are hungry and they need to be fed. So those first few months, I think, check on them, make sure they're safe, make sure they're fed, make sure they're dry, make sure there's nothing else going on, and then quietly lay them back down and leave the room and let them go back to sleep. Because our ultimate goal is wanting to have babies who grow into young toddlers and children who can learn to put themselves back to sleep. So as they get older, sometimes we get so used to those patterns that, oh, my baby's crying, I jump up, I need to feed them. And to tell you the truth, that happened to me. I was like, I'm such a good mom. I just am so responsive. And then one day I woke up and I was like, she doesn't need to keep eating in the middle of the night. I need to let her learn how to put herself back to sleep. And the other problem with responding to that constantly is they don't learn how to put themselves back to sleep. And you really want them to build that ability, because we all like to be able to wake up and roll over and go right back to sleep. So after a few months, that's when you want to start spreading out those response times, checking on them, maybe just to make sure they're okay, but not going in and fixing what is not really a problem by some action that you take as a parent.
Yeah. Kind of what you're describing is that cry it out method. And it's also been called the Ferber method because there was a Dr. Ferber, who described it in his book, How to Solve Your Child's Sleep Problems. And then has been pushback like, well, if I let my baby just cry all night for hours at a time, is that going to cause anxiety and mental health problems down the road? And there has been no evidence to suggest that that is true. And you can also look at it as getting your child to be able to soothe themselves once they get to be, a few months old is an important skill for them to learn in life. And our jobs as parents sometimes is not easy, that we have to, as much as it hurts us to want to hold them and comfort them and make them stop crying, part of being a parent is also teaching our kids how to be able to do some things for themselves, including soothing themselves. And these crying babies also keep parents up at night, and parents then are sleep deprived. And you're not going to be as good of a parent if you're operating on very few hours sleep night after night after night. So getting this under control in your kids, not only good for your kid, it's really good for your own mental health as well. So I am definitely a proponent for, that go in and check on them for sure. But then, if they don't really need anything, just let them cry, and they will go to sleep. And as long as you don't reinforce, if crying doesn't get them out of bed, then hopefully it will extinguish. It just takes a few nights. And then they get sick, and then, they get an ear infection, and then you do cuddle them and love them. And then you're kind of starting at square one once they're feeling better because they get used to that. So those are the bumps, up and down in the road for sure. Alex, do you have any comments on that?
I was going to talk about this when we discussed toddlers, but since we're on the topic already, so you had a really good episode with one of our buddies, Jack Stevens, a while back, and he had a great quote about part of our parental obligation is to have our kids learn some grit and in a loving way. And we all get up every 2.5 hours because of our sleep cycles. And if I got up and wanted somebody to cuddle me or kind of soothe me every 2 hours, one, it would be a problem at home, and two, I wouldn't function. So as an adult, that's something which is just innately done. We get up, we don't even know we get up in the middle of the night, and then we go back to sleep. So Jack's comment was exactly what you said, is that it's part of our job to, in a loving way, teach our kids to develop some grit about things that are vital to know down the road. And the Ferber method does work. I'll get into that a little bit more of toddlers, but there will be some pushback, and I can get into that when we get into that question.
Yeah. And I have two very well-developed, normal functioning young adult children who both were, the Ferber method was used on both of them to help them sleep through the night. And there really was, no issues with that at all, other than that it was after a few nights, it was a nice, quiet, peaceful evening in the home, usually. So let's, yeah.
To say, I'll add to both of what you just said. We also did that. And when I talk with parents about it, I say, you will have a few tough nights. So don't decide you're going to do this the night before you have a big job interview or some important meeting or something that's really critical going on. But both of you together need to decide that starting next Wednesday evening, or maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday, so you can get a little extra sleep on the weekend, we're going to do it. And your point about if you really adhere to that, it does drop pretty dramatically after a few nights, maybe 4 or 5. So some people do sort of a gradual Ferber thing where they just sit in the room and then they stand in the door, and that could work also, but it does take more time. So I think forewarned, if people know that it will be a little hard, and I understand that, but it won't hurt your baby as long as they're alone on their back in the crib. Yeah. or a toddler.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can imagine, especially these young babies who, when they have colic, we've talked about colic before, and I don't want to go down that path. We could spend the rest of an hour talking about colic. But you can kind of see how babies get shaken. Like when you hear a baby crying and you just want them to stop crying, and you've just had enough and you're sleep deprived. And so it really is okay to walk away from a crying baby and let them cry. And, you make sure that they're safe, but go do something else, because it can really get on your every last nerve. And we certainly don't want to harm our children because of that. You did mention, Alex, that episode with Dr. Jack Stevens. He's a psychologist here at Nationwide Children's Hospital. I'm going to put a link to that show in the show notes as well. It was episode 469, called Solving Sleep Problems. And it really takes a deeper dive into behavioral problems involving sleep. And
he does a great job on that episode.
Yeah, it was really well done. And so we'll put a link to that for folks. So let's move on to toddlers. Alex, bedtime routines are really important. And we all know kids like to do the same things over and over again, watch the same shows over and over again, play with the same toys over and over again. And there's something comforting about having a bedtime routine that can really help them be successful at falling asleep, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to start off with the fact that toddlers are like sports cars. When they get rolling during the day, they're all over the place, and that's why they need more sleep. So you have to sort of ratchet them down like the hour before sleep occurs. And I'm going to also throw out the fact that for both this and the next question, you have to have everybody at home on the same page. So if mom or dad are doing a sleep hygiene routine, we'll talk about that. But grandma and grandpa are busy watching TV, or the older sibling is blaring their music, it kind of kills the whole effect. So you really have to have the whole house on board with not only sleep hygiene, but also how do you respond to a toddler getting up in the middle of the night. So as far as routines are concerned, a couple of big ones. All electronics should be off at least an hour or 2 hours before sleep time. One, because they're stimulating. And two, because of the blue light that kind of hits a gland in our brain that kind of tells us get up. So number one is just get rid of the electronics at least an hour. Some people say 2 hours. We had a 2-hour rule in our house when the kids were younger. Then something sort of soothing to kind of ratchet them down, reading, snuggling, singing a song, playing a simple game like a puzzle or drawing, something where they can still focus, but they're slowing down physically. The third thing is the hygiene part, like real hygiene part. Let's brush our teeth. Let's wash our face. Let's change into pajamas. We're actually doing like your last bit of things before you actually go to sleep. And then for a lot of families, there is the important either prayer time or, together time or do something cultural where that's the last thing you're going to do before a child goes to sleep. And that's sort of like a 4-step: stop the electronics, do something mental, but not physically strenuous to kind of focus them in, do some hygiene things, change into pajamas, and then do something special like prayer time or meditation time or sing like a quiet song. Like lullabies actually were designed for this. And that's sort of like your classic like sleep routine for toddlers. But again, you have to have everybody on board.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just add, if you have smart bulbs or smart switches at home, start dimming those lights before bedtime and just create that mood of calmness. That can definitely be helpful. Okay, so you get them in bed, and we've all had this. If you've ever had a toddler in your home, you finally get them to bed, and you're all excited. It's adult time. We're going to have a glass of wine and watch some TV or whatever. And the toddler keeps getting out of bed and keeps calling for you, and they want you, and just on and on. How can we help our toddlers manage that bedtime without needing our help?
So I'm going to start with some upstream kind of comments. The first is, if a toddler has that much energy at night, they may not need that second nap, or even they may not need a nap at all during the day. In other words, if they're active enough, they should be exhausted enough that once you do this sleep routine, they should be crashing and going to sleep for at least one cycle. So a child, if I have families that come to clinic and say they get up all night long, and then I'll ask them, they take a nap right after dinner, they're going to be up. So either stop the naps completely or move the nap up by a lot of hours. Number 2, increase the activity level. And it's not just physical activity level. And that's why that second thing was like a mental activity level. Do something where you're still using the brain, which is going to use some energy, and you're kind of focusing that brain in, but you're still using enough that it kind of slows them down. That's, I think, 2 upstream things to do. The third thing is, a lot of our families, and I work occasionally at a clinic called Hilltop, and Hilltop, actually, the average number of rooms in a house is 2, and you'll have up to 3 generations living in a 2-bedroom house. So now, for example, they live in an apartment complex where there is so much noise going on that it's hard to kind of have that toddler not get up or not be stimulated as soon as they fall asleep. And that may be something where we're all going to go to Uncle Joe's house down the street to watch a movie, and one person stays here with the kids, because otherwise it's really hard to kind of establish that. And I think that's important to kind of build into the discussions with everybody in the house. And even your neighbors may, if my toddler screams, they're not being tortured, is because we're doing the Ferber method for a couple days. And then the fourth thing is, if they're getting up, try to figure out the reason why. But a lot of it, if it really is that they just want to get up, then it's a matter of doing the Ferber, where I think it's easier in toddlers. And to kind of discuss with them, you have to be here for half an hour, and then then we can discuss. And most kids are going to go back down. And also soothing things. We played Yanni and Barry Manilow in the background for our one son who liked to get up all the time. We would have like night lights that had a non-blue sort of soothing color. Humidifiers in the dead of winter have that soothing kind of white noise. Some scents. Some people like scents, and some cultural. Some of our immigrant families actually do a lot of lavender or sandalwood, where they kind of have that scent, and the kids, when they get up, they smell and they're like, "Oh, I'm fine," and go back to sleep. So there are a lot of things you can try, but toddlers they're high energy, they're very independent, so it's going to vary from family to family. But a lot of it really is just deciding how to, multiple ways to kind of approach it. But you got to wear them out during the day.
Yeah.
I think one other thing I would add, those are all super, super tips. And I really think it's great that you emphasized how important it is that, again, everybody in the house needs to be on the same page, and how to come up with some strategies if you have several people that are sharing the same room to sleep in or to live in. But the other thing is, if they get up, it's usually because they want attention, because they love being with their family. So in that situation, when you finally put them to bed, you want to say good night, sleep tight, mommy loves you, and we'll see you in the morning. So they know that they're safe and loved But then when they get up in the middle of the night, you just very matter-of-factly walk them back to bed or carry them back to bed. But you don't get in bed with them and you don't repeat the routine, because if you do, then you're reinforcing, oh, they got exactly what they wanted by getting up. So of course I'll keep doing that. So you don't want to get mad, but you don't want to be warm and fuzzy either. It's more of a mechanical thing, like, okay, time to go back to bed.
And that's a great point. So the clinic I'm at, and a lot of our clinics have a large immigrant population, but we have some immigrant populations that will never do the Ferber method. It's so counterculture to the way they've been raised or the way they think about sleep. But at least we agree upon the fact that if your child gets up 2 hours in, don't give them a lot of attention. So dark, dim room, dim responses, make it matter of fact. And some families will not buy the Ferber. So I think that's a great compromise for the families that, if Mary gets up, you walk her back and gently, lovingly, but don't make a big commotion out of it. And after all, they're like, well, it's probably not worth me getting up because I'd rather listen to Yanni and have lavender smells in my room.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. We had
not a young toddler, but an older toddler or a young preschool 3 or 4 year old, you could potentially consider too, like a little sticker reward chart. So if they, and you have to kind of build what your goal is. If your goal is for them to stay in bed for at least an hour or so, or whatever you agree on is the goal, if they succeed in meeting that goal, they get a sticker and you can start to do some little rewards. Oh, you stayed in bed all night last night. Now you get some larger reward.
Yeah.
They have to be able to to associate that reward with their behavior, but that's another approach.
We had a 3 strikes you're out policy. So we had a sticker chart. And this is for my daughter. My son, it's funny how kids are so different in the same family. My son, you'd put him to bed, he went to sleep. But my daughter, this was always a big issue. And we had a sticker chart for her. And it was 3 strikes and you're out. So that would mean you get 2 times that you can call us or get out of bed. And that's fine. But if you did it a 3rd time, then you didn't get a sticker in the morning. And if there was only 2 strikes, then in the morning she'd get to put a sticker on her sticker chart. And, you get 5 stickers. And then, we actually bought this toy set that had like a bunch of parts to it. And so she could pick out like one part when she had 5 stickers. And then it would go back in the big box, would go back in the closet. And then after 5 more stickers, now you can pick out another part of this set. And that worked pretty well. That wouldn't work for other kids. It's just, Alex, you said, you have to judge it based on what motivates your particular child.
All right, Mike, I know you too well. You're a big softie. You probably gave her a couple of foul balls also there. So
probably.
Okay.
Probably. I like your reward system a lot, that it was part of a bigger picture and a part of that, because, it's very natural to say, you get an ice cream cone or whatever. And of course, an ice cream cone is fine once in a while, but we're also trying to promote all this healthy eating and not associate food with rewards. So I love your what their reward was. And that also, again, based on the age of the child, it helps build that deferred gratification, that working in their own little way towards achieving something that's of value to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it allowed us to have nice, quiet evenings.
Yeah.
There's that. Okay, Alex, there is this thing that parents may have heard about called night terrors that can happen, especially during the toddler years and the young childhood. They're different than nightmares, right? But what are night terrors? They sound terrifying.
So I'm glad we're not covering sleepwalking or nightmares, because we'd be here literally 2 hours. So night terrors is where a child just comes popping out during sleep and they're screaming and yelling, and they seem to be completely out of tune with everything around them. We had one child who had night terrors for about 6 months, and they're very sporadic. And then the whole house is up, and then you're just waiting for the next night terror to occur. The kids don't remember this happening. A lot of kids are going to remember their nightmare. So this seems to be a very deep sleep sort of scenario where they just get up and they act out like they're in horrible distress. They are dramatic, speaking from experience and talking to families that have seen this. Commonly seen in the mid-toddler to early school year age. The good news is that almost everybody outgrows this. It doesn't mean that you're going to have sleep issues down the road. Most times there's no reason for these to occur, but it can be because the child's hungry, sick, cold, full bladder, repeat in their pull-up. In other words, there could be a physical reason to kind of get this rolling. Some kids with anxiety, some kids who have like PTSD because of an unfortunate abuse incident can have more night terrors. But again, it's still going to be a small percentage of what causes most night terrors. And most kids, you don't know a reason. And the way you respond to it is essentially just ride it out. And I remember one time our child just popped out of bed, screamed and yelled for about 5 minutes, went back to sleep. Now, my wife and I are then up for the next 9 hours, as well as all the older siblings, just waiting for her to do it again. But in the morning, there's like nothing happened. And, that was where we dealt with it a few other times that happens. Like, okay, she's having a night terror and she'll outgrow this. And she did in about 6 months to a year.
Yeah.
They're common. They're a lot more common than people realize. And they scare living daylights out of you when it happens, or night lights out of you.
Yeah. And they don't remember it. That's the key.
Yeah.
They don't
they have no
remember
idea it happened. No idea it happened. Yeah.
Okay. So those are night terrors. Let's transition to school age. We talked about routines in the toddlers. Marianne, what do you think about school age kids? How do we adjust that bedtime routine as our kids get a little older?
Well, a couple things. First, a bedtime routine, I think, is just as important for school age kids and teenagers and adults as it is for those little ones that Alex talked about. And also, what does a routine mean? It means that you have the same familiar pattern that you have every time you go to bed, with a rare exception. So it becomes part of the way your mind and body function, and it becomes calming and comfortable because it is a routine. And a lot of those parts of the routine that he talked about apply at they may look a little different, but they apply to the school-aged kids as well. That first, you want to get off all those electronics off at least an hour, if not longer, before it's bedtime to get ready to go to bed. And also not have those electronics be in their room even, or something that's part of their bedtime routine. They should stay out of the room and not engage them and not have them look at that light, et cetera. And then try to lead up to that time with more calming activities. You don't want to watch a crazy television show or a wild game or whatever, just before you're trying to get people, little ones and kiddos, to calm down. So the other thing that might be something more common in this age group is caffeine. Kids may be drinking a soft drink, a soda pop, or whatever. And unfortunately, some of those school-age kids may be drinking, I hope they're not drinking Red Bull, but other caffeinated beverages. So do a little bit of a deep dive and make sure those things aren't inadvertently or purposefully part of their what they're eating or drinking a Coke with dinner. For a lot of reasons, that's not good. So those are some of the things that might complicate a school age routine as well. But then you want to, I like the part about getting ready for bed first. So get your pajamas on, brush your teeth, because some people don't like doing all that. So get that stuff out of the way, and then start to transition into a quieter activity, reading together. I love reading together, soft music, dim, softer lighting, as quiet as it can be. A fan in the background may help muffle some of that extra noise that might be nearby. Don't let the room doesn't have to be super warm. I think a lot of times we think, oh my goodness, I don't want it to be cold in bed, but keep the temperature high 60s. That's what blankets are for, right? And also don't have them think about their room or their bed as a punishment. You want them to think of it as a place of rest and relaxation.
Yeah.
And then spend some quiet time together, reading, saying nighttime prayers, just cuddling, to make it a very pleasant transition. And at all these ages, it's always good to let them to leave the room when they're still a little bit awake.
Yeah.
So they get used to being in their bed awake and knowing it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you're going to have kids around this age, as you try to do that, who are saying that they're afraid of the dark or they're afraid of being alone. What's the best way to deal with that issue?
I am a fan of not bright, but night lights. I think a night light, it just changes I think the light can be calming, but it also keeps those little dark corners from being full of imaginative things. Sometimes I think kids can hear sounds that are part of the way just every house or apartment has, but suddenly if you're alone in the dark, is that a bad guy, or is that just the sound of the refrigerator kicking on or whatever? So I think it's worth maybe exploring that with them if they bring that up. I heard a funny noise, but I think a nightlight, leaving the hall light on, if that works instead. I don't know if it's a bad thing to agree to sort of sit outside their room. I think I've seen parents find that to be a useful strategy. You're not going to go to sleep with them, in bed with them. You're not going to stay there all night with them, but you'll be nearby, and they know you're nearby in case anything goes wrong, at least in their perception.
Yeah.
So I think there's and to downplay it. I don't think, okay, let's look and see if there's anybody under the bed, or, because I think that just creates more opportunities for potential fear.
Yeah. And to go along with Alex's previous analogy of upstream behavior, you really want to watch what your kids are exposed to, especially if they're going to be sensitive to that. So, if it's a kid who already is complained, I'm afraid of the dark, there are certain shows and certain books that you may want to hold off on exposing them to. And one thing that I learned is if there's a movie that you're excited to share with your kids, but it's been a long time since you've watched it, maybe watch it again before you watch it with them, because Gremlins did not turn out well when my kids were little. I remember Gremlins, they were these fuzzy little fun animals, I wanted to share that with my kids. And then what happens after dark, or when they get wet and all that business. And it went south from there very quickly. So something else to think about, what they're exposed to.
The bar has changed a lot on, G and PG. What I used to consider PG, what I used to consider R is now PG. So I think people have a very different, at least the adults have a very different perspective of what is appropriate for kids. And looking at that through critical eyes, I think, is a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to bedwetting. This is another common issue, both for school-age kids and then also for some teenagers as well. Why do some kids wet the bed, and what can we do about that, Marianne?
Well, bedwetting, I think one of the most important things for everybody to know is that it's not that it's common. It's a lot more common than people realize, and it's a problem in general. Most of the time, it's only a problem because of how it affects a family or the child and what they want to do, or maybe their self-esteem. So it basically has to do with how the different nerves that control our bladders and our ability to feel like, oh, I have to get up and go to the bathroom, and I can't. I feel like I woke up and I have to go all of a sudden. And all of that is developing, just like all the other things are developing in a child's and an older child's body and a teenager. So we know that about 15% of children at the time they enter school, roughly, are still wet the bed. It's a little bit more common in boys than in girls. But we also know that for most kids, about every year, more kids outgrow it. So that it's pretty rare for somebody to still be wetting the bed when they're 15 or 16. Occasionally, people can still be wetting the bed at that age. What we like to do is to check there's questions that we can always ask to make sure that there's not something else going on causing this. It's important for us to sort out if children had stopped wetting the bed and then started again, because sometimes that can mean that there has been some development of some underlying health condition that might now be causing them to make more urine and wet the bed for that reason. But for most kids who have what we call kind of routine normal bedwetting, we can reassure children and families that they'll outgrow it. We don't want it to be something that sometimes parents are more concerned about it than the kids, and some parents can get angry. So it's not the child's fault, and it's certainly not the parents' fault. It's just the way it is. But making sure that children aren't punished, that you sort of build in ways to manage it. There's really nice sort of waterproof pads that you can put under the sheets, things like that, to minimize the amount of laundry and uncomfortableness. And then deciding with the family over time whether they want to try to cut back on it or help the child maybe just be dry if they're going to go to camp or have a sleepover or go stay with grandma for a week or whatever. And we can talk about that in a minute, but I'll pause for a second.
If I can ask, so there seem to be some kids. So our brain, once we fall asleep, produces a hormone that tells your kidneys to slow down. So we're going to produce less urine when we're sleeping. It's called the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. And there are some kids where their hormone doesn't kick in until 1 or 2 sleep cycles in. So they'll fill up a bladder in 2 hours in their first sleep cycle. So try to wake them up 2 hours in a quiet way, just go to the bathroom. And that solves probably around 25 to 30% of the kids who have bedwetting at night, just to kind of wake them up. And they may be one of those that once they empty their bladder and then the brain kind of kicks in with the hormone, they're fine. And then there are some kids that the house can blow up and they're still sleeping that have no idea that they're getting full. And that's where bed alarms may come in handy, where any little pee on a pad just screams bloody murder, and then the whole house gets up because the alarm's going off, and then their brain is now sort of like primed that, oh, I'm about to go and I hate that noise that goes in my ear, so I'm going to get up and go to the bathroom. So you're almost like waking them up, getting them a little bit more aware of their bladder in the middle of the night. So 2 other ways you can potentially work on this during school years and teen years.
Yeah.
And you can work on some of those other things too, like making sure they're not drinking a lot of caffeine before they go to bed, and make sure they go to the bathroom right before they go to bed. Or if they wake up on their own, you can make sure they go to the bathroom then, as opposed to waking them up. Also, you don't need to drastically cut back on fluid in the evening, but take a look at how much they're drinking and see if you can maybe shift some of that to earlier in the day. And then if you do want to treat it, as Alex pointed out, there's bed alarms, and then there are some medication that can be used. Again, you want everybody in the family on board. If you're going to have that alarm go off at night, even though you want the child to be the one to wake up, other people are going to wake up too.
Yeah. Another episode that I want to point people to is PediaCast episode 481, and I'll put a link to this in the show notes as well. That was called Potty Training, Bedwetting, and Other Pee and Poop Problems. And we do talk about bedwetting in considerable detail over the course of that episode. So if you want to learn more about it, check out that particular episode of the podcast. Let's move on to teenagers. Alex, you introduced the term sleep hygiene to us, and Marianne had pointed out that we're not talking about brushing our teeth and washing our face. What did you mean by the term sleep hygiene, and what are some good guidelines for teenagers?
I think it starts off with having teenagers realize the importance of sleep. And I think adults have the same exact problem of thinking that sleep is something I need to conquer and not something that is vital to my health. So I think sleep hygiene starts off with the fact of just realizing that I need to get X number of hours, probably 8, 9 or more, to be a functional teenager who can study and be happy and do well in school and in life. So I think sleep hygiene starts with the fact that a teen has to buy into the realization that come a certain hour, I need to start ratcheting down for sleep and kind of prep the day around that. So if you have a chat room that's going to open up at 10 o'clock, you're not going to get to sleep until probably midnight. If you're playing a game with your buddies, in Hungary, like my sons, when they get online, they have like all these buddies around the world, and they'll play some game. And if you're doing that right before sleep, you're not going to fall asleep. So a lot of it's just convincing the teen that for that hour before sleep, your expected sleep time or needed sleep time, you have to start slowing down. So the sleep hygiene will include same things as before: cut back all electronics, essentially have nothing to do with anything that can stimulate your brain, and also anything with a blue light. So 1 hour before, you want to read, you want to, do something mental, that's great. But nothing electronic. Number 2 is really try to turn off the day. And I think this is hard for teenagers and even for adults to do, where for about 10 or 15 minutes, I love gratitude journals, where you just basically sit there and say, this is what I'm thankful for. And then here are the problems I have before I go to sleep. And I'm going to throw them into this book. And then I'm not going to forget, I'm not going to worry about them until tomorrow. And like Marianne mentioned earlier, is that sometimes your problems get solved after you have a good night's sleep. The third thing is to have some kind of routine. And that can be for teenagers. I have chamomile tea, or I have, something non-caffeinated to drink, like something warm. And then I'll go in my room and I'll meditate, or I'll say prayers, I'll stretch, or nothing too physical. And then go to my room to get sleep. And also part of sleep hygiene is not to use your room for anything but sleep. So if your bed is your desk and is your place to study and is your place where you get stressed out about what friends are commenting on your phone, it's going to be hard to sleep because you now associate your room with all those activities. Some people can't help it. That's all they have. That's the only place they can go to. But if you have the ability to kind of use your bed just for sleeping, then perfect. And then the fourth thing is that, going upstream again, get activities, try to get some walks in, get physical activities, try not to take a nap during the middle of the day. So if you get home from school and you're taking a 2-hour nap, you're not going to sleep at night, then you need that long stretch of time off in the middle of the night. So sleep hygiene is through a lot of ideas out there, but it's really a mixture of things for the teenagers.
Yeah. What about the ones who, they're laying in bed and they just cannot fall asleep, or they wake up in the middle of the night and, an hour goes by and they're still just laying there? What are some ideas for, when you're just laying in bed and you can't sleep?
And again, Dr. Stevens talked about this at length in his episode, but just to kind of summarize, again, go upstream, get the activity. If you come home from school and you're anxious or you're stressed out, go for a walk. If it's like it was here, 5 degrees, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whenever it was when we had the ice storm, do something at home, do yoga at home, do kind of jumping jacks, something to burn off some of that stress when you get home. And then after dinner, do something else to kind of bust the stress down a little bit. So you need to do some upstream activities to begin with, and try not to have any sleep during the day. Try to avoid caffeine, like at least 2 hours before sleep. So you have all those sort of physical reasons that you're not falling asleep to kind of get out of the way. Looking at sort of like behavioral reasons, again, the gratitude journal my put away journal, where here are 3 or 4 things that went well today, and here are 3 or 4 things that I'm going to put in a book and not worry about until tomorrow morning. Just to kind of have them not to think about them. And that's your way of saying, I'm closing my chapter on this big exam I have on Friday, and it's Wednesday night. I know tomorrow's going to be a bad night studying for it. That's okay. You put it in the book and you forget about it. And then I think Dr. Stevens mentioned that if you're not asleep in 20 minutes or so, just get up. That you shouldn't be just laying in bed for hours on end, because now all of a sudden you're anxious about the fact that you're not sleeping. Do something with a dim light, go to like a comfortable chair, and then start, meditating, praying, think about your journal, do something quieter. And then once you start feeling groggy, go back to bed. But I think laying in bed for hours on end is a horrible idea, just because now all of a sudden you're stressed out that you're laying in bed for hours on end.
Yeah. You still want when you
a limit how long you're going to try to go back to sleep, and then do exactly what you described, Alex. But whatever you do, don't start checking your phone.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you start that cycle of another hit of, oh, that's interesting, or, oh, look what they said, or, oh, I didn't know I had that to worry about, you're going to just get all riled up.
And don't turn the TV on. Don't play video games. You want non-stimulating activities, maybe reading or working a jigsaw puzzle, or, something that's not quite as stimulating as screen time. All right. One final sleep-related topic for teenagers, and that is snoring and this idea of obstructive sleep apnea. If a kid's a snorer, does that mean they have obstructive sleep apnea? And how do we approach those issues?
Great question, and kind of hard to answer. So I think you have to start off with the position that they're sleeping in. So you can take anybody and have them crash on a 2-foot couch at grandma's house and they'll snore. Or somebody sleeping in the car in the back seat, kind of crooked, and they'll snore. So snoring is going to be a positional issue for a large percentage of teenagers that are snoring. So try to make sure that you stretch out on the bed, have a good airway kind of positioned when you're sleeping. So get a good pillow, make sure that the pillow is the right height, make sure that you're sleeping in a way that you can stretch out that neck and airway. If you're still snoring and you can't tell if you're snoring, but ask somebody, am I snoring all night long? If you have just occasional snoring, it's probably not sleep apnea, but there may be something else going on. It could be allergies. It could be large tonsils. It could be that the room's dry and then you have a dry nose and you're kind of breathing through it. but it's something to consider that, I need to find a reason for it. Talk to one of us in clinic. If you have pauses when you're sleeping or the parent or older sibling says, it sounds like you're choking while you're sleeping, or, you stop for 10 seconds. Now all of a sudden you have what we call apnea, where you're actually stopping for a while and you seem to be fighting to get your airway open to get things back down to the lungs. It can be a brain issue, something called central sleep apnea, but the vast majority of the time before it went for teenagers, something called obstructive. There's something blocking that airway. And then when you fall asleep, the airway just kind of gets more relaxed, and now you can't catch your breath. And it's dangerous. You can actually have long-term complications from sleep apnea. So I think the big question is it positional? No. Is it something that's just a sporadic or occasional? No. So if this sounds like it's like every night and you have spells where it sounds like your son's not catching his breath, yes, you need to go to ENT so they can take a look what's causing obstruction or get a sleep study or both.
Yeah.
That's something we really need to go to a physician or a nurse practitioner to kind of figure out what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So snoring, especially if they have those pauses that you mentioned, definitely talk to your doctor about that. And even if they don't have the pauses, if they're not getting enough sleep and it's causing them to have behavioral problems the next day, or they're having trouble with school, whether it be with friends or with academic work, with their schoolwork, they may be waking up more often than you think at night. And so a sleep study could kind of tease out whether there's, really something there or not. But definitely talk to your doctor about that. Very, very important.
And also think about this daytime sleepiness or grogginess that do they fall asleep when they're driving, like at a red light or that kind of thing, because it has these safety implications as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation about sleep topics and sleep problems from infancy to teenagers. Before we go, Alex, tell us about primary care pediatrics at Nationwide Children's Hospital.
So I hopefully won't put you to sleep with the description, but we have, I think, currently 14 clinics that we run, and we have a 15th standalone clinic. We have, I think, a dozen school-based clinics, and then we have a mobile van that goes around to do some school events and health events. We cover close to 100,000 children now with about 250,000 visits. So it's a very large system. I think we're still the largest system in the country that's based out of a children's hospital. I have about 100 buddies in primary care, including Mary Ann that work in the division. We have some phenomenal staff that helps out. And it really is a way for us to take care of the kids in this area as best we can. So it's a task, and we have great leadership to kind of help out with primary care. But it's a lot of kids that we see in a lot of different clinics, and the residents see them also. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll put a link to primary care pediatrics at Nationwide Children's in the show notes. We also have the primary care referral line if you need to call to find a physician for your child and you're in the Central Ohio area. We'll put that phone number in the show notes as well. And then also we'll have all of the links that I had mentioned that relate to plain language, including that plain language playlist with all the past episodes over in SoundCloud, and then those other PediaCast episodes that have to do with sleeping and bedwetting and all that. You'll find all of those things in the show notes over at PediaCast.org. So once again, Dr. Mary Ann Abrams and Dr. Alex Rakowsky, both with Primary Care Pediatrics at Nationwide Children's Hospital. Thank you both so much for being here today. We always love when you stop by. Thanks for the invite. So take care, guys.
Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
We are back with just enough time to say thanks once again to all of you for taking time to make PediaCast a part of your day. We really do appreciate that. Also, thanks to our guests this week, Dr. Mary Ann Abrams and Dr. Alex Rakowsky, both with Primary Care Pediatrics at Nationwide Children's Hospital. Don't forget, you can find us wherever podcasts are found. We're in the Apple and Google podcast apps, iHeartRadio, Spotify, SoundCloud, Amazon Music, and most other podcast apps for iOS and Android. Our landing site is PediaCast.org. You'll find our entire archive of past programs there, along with show notes, our terms of use agreement, and that handy contact page if you would like to suggest a future topic for the program. Reviews are helpful wherever you get your podcasts. We always appreciate when you share your thoughts about the show. And we love connecting with you on social media. You'll find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Simply search for PediaCast. Don't forget about our sibling podcast, PediaCast CME. That stands for Continuing Medical Education. It's similar to this program. We do turn the science up a couple notches and offer free continuing medical education credit for those who listen. Of course, that includes doctors, but also nurse practitioners, physician assistants, nurses, pharmacists, psychologists, social workers, and dentists. And since Nationwide Children's is jointly accredited by all of these professional organizations, it's likely we offer the exact credits you need to fulfill your state's continuing medical education requirements. Of course, you want to be sure the contents of the episode matches your scope of practice. Shows and details are available at the landing site for that program, pediacastcme.org. You can also listen wherever podcasts are found. Simply search for PediaCast CME. Thanks again for stopping by, and until next time, this is Dr. Mike saying stay safe, stay healthy, and stay involved with your kids. So long, everybody.
This program is a production of Nationwide Children's. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on PediaCast.